When I was 19, I worked for a company that allocated labor to rural areas of Australia. Basically, what you did was tell them when you were available, and they'd send you to a remote farm for a few weeks where you'd do whatever they needed done. It was hard work and long hours, but good pay and good fun if you got in with a nice group of workers. When this occurred, I was working on a large property. I was told it covered roughly the same landmass as the state of Maryland, USA, about 9 hours from Sydney City, and the property itself was about 40 minutes from the nearest town. In short, it was the middle of nowhere. I was working at the farm clearing bushland with 3 other guys my age from the city. Our boss was a guy called Jeremy, who owned the farm and supervised us while helping out with the work. He was pretty laid back and was generally really good to us. This summer in particular was very hot and the work was hard. So one day when the temperature hit about 38 degrees Celsius, about 100 Fahrenheit, Jeremy decided to give us the afternoon off. He said he knew of a waterhole on the farm, about a 25-minute drive north. I was excited for a swim, but the other guys just wanted to relax for the afternoon. So him and I hopped in one of the work trucks and started heading across the property. It was mostly wide, empty expanses with a few clumps of scattered bushland. Jeremy wasn't much of a talker, so we drove more or less in silence. After about 20 minutes, however, he suddenly perked up and jabbed me in the ribs. "Do you see that over there, beneath the 2 dead trees?" I should mention here that if you're not familiar with inland areas, particularly those in Australia, they are brown or red, and mostly flat and bland, meaning any bright colors stick out like a sore thumb. So you can imagine our surprise when we could see a large blue angular structure far off in the distance. We steered in its direction, and as we got closer we realized it was a huge blue shipping container just sitting in the middle of nowhere. Jeremy was perplexed. I asked him if he knew what it was, but he obviously didn't. He said he hadn't seen it when he drove through the same area, about 5 weeks before, and he wanted to go and see what it was. Initially, we pulled to a stop about 100 meters away from it. At this stage, I had a really bad feeling. The whole thing wasn't right. It's hard to explain. But if you can imagine seeing such a foreign object in the middle of a huge barren expanse, it had to be something weird. Jeremy, however, wanted to investigate, which I understood, given it was his property, but in truth I was really anxious. As we got closer, things got even more bizarre. There was a big diesel generator behind it thumping away, and a CCTV camera on each side, all motion activated so they buzzed from side to side, following us as we moved around. I tried to reason with Jeremy, something along the lines of, "With all this security, someone obviously doesn't want us here, let's just go." He brushed me off, however, reminding me it was his farm, and whoever had put this here was trespassing, so he wanted to go inside. Despite all the surveillance, there was only a small padlock on the huge door. We had some bolt cutters in his toolbox, and after a bit of a struggle, we broke the lock and went inside. The first thing I noticed was the rush of cold air as we got in. The place was air-conditioned, which I must admit was quite pleasant on such a hot day. We searched around for a light switch, but I could already see this was some sort of IT setup. There were flashing LEDs all around the place, and the sort of hum you hear when a hard drive is working hard. When we finally switched on the lights, we could see a sophisticated office setup. There were hard drives the size of bar fridges and other computer equipment lining the walls, sometimes piled 2 or 3 high, and plastic storage boxes scattered around the far wall, and several desks with computer monitors arranged in the middle, complete with rolling office chairs. At this stage, I felt like I was in one of those nonsensical dreams. This made absolutely no sense. We wandered to the middle and sat down at the desks to see if the computers could give us any idea of what the hell was going on here. My heart was racing and I just wanted to bolt. We had been seen by the CCTV, so if anyone was monitoring, they already knew we were here. Jeremy, on the other hand, was adamant we had to get to the bottom of this. So I put on a brave face and started looking through the computer. This went on for a while, but in short, neither of us had a very high grasp of technology outside of Facebook and Microsoft Word. The best I can describe it from my lay position is that it was endless lists of computer talk. It was like the old Napster or LimeWire download screens looked like. It's constantly picking up and receiving data, then recording it on several windows. I gave up on the computers and walked cautiously over the far end of the container to the big pile of storage boxes. By then I was pretty sure no one else was there, as there was nowhere to hide really, but I was still incredibly on edge. I decided, against my better judgment, to see what was inside all these boxes. My brief sift through this box still makes me feel sick to the stomach. It didn't take long for me to realize that this box was full of posters, DVDs, and photos, all of hardcore child pornography. One thing that still gets to me is that it was all neatly ordered into folders and smaller boxes. These people were organized. I immediately recoiled, jumped up, and ran over to Jeremy. I could hardly string a sentence together. I said something to the effect of, "Mate, get out, child sex, go, get the fuck up." I dragged him out, composed myself, and managed to explain what I saw. We jumped back into the truck and sped back to the house. The farm had no mobile phone reception, and we hadn't bought the satellite phone, so we had to get back to the landline to call the police. Once we called them, they still had to make it all the way to the farm from the nearest police station, which was in a town about a half hour from the town closest to the farm. As I mentioned, very remote. We waited, talking frantically about what we'd seen, until the cops arrived almost an hour later. They arrived with 2 4-wheel drives, and we jumped in and led them back. This is where it gets worse. By the time we got back, the container door was open, and there was fire inside. We had only 2 small extinguishers in the cars, and these did very little. The fire department took an hour to get there, by which stage most of the damage was already done. An arson report by the federal police found almost no evidence of the computer equipment described, and only traces of paper and cardboard. This means that whoever ran it knew we were there, and had time to come and remove most of it and get away. There were various ways to get off the property, and the landmass was huge, so there was no real way to tail them. Since the police hadn't taken us all too seriously in the first instance, probably due to our poor explanation on the phone, aerial surveillance was also impossible by the time we had pieced it all together. I took interest in following it up, but with no real evidence of who might be responsible, the investigation went cold. I've kept in contact with Jeremy, and the shipping container is still sitting there on the farm, as it's too expensive to move. I'll never forget what I saw in those boxes. This happened to me in 2008. This was a huge thing to my friends and family, and I didn't really talk about it back then as it scared the fuck out of me, but it was a while ago and is a really well-known, creepy story among myself and in my friends and family, so I think I may as well share it, as it is admittedly terrifying. I was living with my parents and sister in Brisbane, Australia at the time, 2008, which means I was 19. I remember my dad had just got Foxtel, cable TV in Australia, but only the TV in the lounge room could use the cable box. And I really wanted to somehow get the cable in my room without paying $99 or whatever for a new box. So my dad one day went out and bought an AV transmitter. It was basically a 2-piece bit of hardware where you would plug this tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room, and it would transmit a video signal to the receiver, connected to the TV in my room. So one Saturday, I decided to connect it. This is a picture I took of the setup when I was telling a friend the story. My younger sister, 16 at the time, was the only other person home at the time, upstairs in her room. My room was downstairs. I opened the box and connected it up. At first I was going back and forth, trying to get the cables right, trying to get the channel right, but no luck, until I finally got something. I remember just sitting there and something started fuzzing, and this is where things start to feel like a horror movie. I remember thinking, oh, here we go, and waiting to see the picture come in clearly. As it started fuzzing in, I remembered that this whole time the cable set-top box wasn't even on, and that's why it wasn't working this whole time. But then why was I getting a signal? It seemed to all hit me at once. As I realized the box was off, the picture fuzzed in, and I saw a bed. First picture I took. I freaked the fuck out, as at first I thought it was my bed. I'd recently seen Saw 2, and remembered that scene where she turns on the TV, and it's a camera filming her in her apartment. That was the first thing I thought of. I sprinted upstairs to my sister, absolutely terrified. I told her to come down and take a look. She came down and we both realized it wasn't my bed. We didn't know whose bed it was, or how I was getting the signal. Obviously it was the AV receiver picking up a camera signal, but we were just so confused as to who or what it was for. Eventually my parents came home, and we concluded that it would have to be a neighbor or someone living close by for us to be receiving the signal. We waited around until about 6 p.m., and then someone came into the room. My dad recognized it as one of our neighbors. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed it had something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or he had set it up to watch the other and see if they were cheating. Either this, or it was to tape themselves having sex. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer and would film himself murdering people in his room. It was just to freak each other out. We'd always make jokes about how one night we'll turn it on and it'll just be his face with clown makeup on staring at the camera waving. And then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. This never happened. But what did happen was still super creepy. We connected to this signal for over a week, but after a few days the novelty kinda wore off. We felt a bit weird watching it and just resigned to the explanation that it was to catch his wife cheating. Till one day, we turned it on and realized what we had discovered. Our neighbors were having a bunch of renovations done to their house. During weekdays they would be out, and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like this for over a month. We started watching the feed and saw a man walk into their room. It was the plumber that had been there regularly for the renovations. We didn't think anything of it until he started opening drawers. I called out to my mom, only person home at the time, and we started watching it. He started getting the wife's underpants and sniffing them, doing all that creepy shit. At first we were like, oh my god, how embarrassing, he's being filmed. Will the neighbors see this somehow? But then what happened next? What truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the camera and looked right down the fucking lens. We were convinced that he knew we were watching. Mom immediately called Dad. I kept watching. He started fiddling with it and then put it back down. I told Mom that I don't think he knew we were watching, but he's definitely the guy that put the camera there. Dad came home, and by this time the plumber had left. Much to Mom's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbors to tell them what we saw. Mom wanted to completely stay out of it and was terrified, understandably. When we told the neighbors, they had no idea what we were talking about. They allowed Dad to go up to their room, and what he found was an installed device in the wall that was designed to monitor water usage, which was completely normal. At the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently, and there were lots of water restrictions, still is now, I think. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but had fitted a camera behind it in the wall to watch the bed. Immediately they called the police, who came over and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear much about it. I spent most of this time just telling my friends, showing them pictures, but truthfully my whole family was scared every night. It was just very creepy thinking that we could have stuff like that hidden in our house. Chances are we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple of weeks, my mom was speaking to the wife next door and asked what happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out he would, at nights, come to our street and sit in his car, which had really tinted windows, and watch them on his laptop. When Mom told me this, I got the biggest shivers. The reason was because on multiple nights, when I had driven home late from my girlfriend's or walked home drunk after a night out, I remember seeing a station wagon. Don't know if that's what they're called outside of Australia, but it's like a big hatchback car, always about 30 meters down the street from our house. It was never there during the day, always at night. I'd always walk past it and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming no one was inside. I was always so confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought it was anything. It still scares me so much that it was just this creepy fucking plumber sitting back in there on a laptop watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbors. Anyway, that's my story. It's all true, and still creeps me out to this day, but my friends and I have a good laugh about it. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I shared a room with my older brother who was around 15. We live in a suburb area in New York. Not the greatest area, but not riddled with crime. There are 2 windows in my room, one that overlooks the backyard and one that connects to the front porch. It came in quite handy for my brother to sneak out and meet with friends. If you step out the window, you are on the porch, so anyone on the porch can access this window. I was never bothered by that thought because quite honestly it had never crossed my mind. My bed was touching this window, while my brother's bed was perpendicular to mine. It was an odd setup, but that's besides the point. Now this was before we had any sort of smartphone or laptop to keep ourselves occupied, so on nights when we weren't sleepy, we would stay up talking to each other and making up dumb games to pass time. This event took place during the summer. We stayed up into the late hours of the night, perks of having no school. It was probably around 2 a.m., and eventually we're playing a game where one of us was a goalkeeper and the other was taking a shot. Football soccer terms. We would both say at the same time either left, center, or right. If the goalkeeper guessed the same as the one taking the shot, he would get a point, and if the person taking the shot said a position other than what the goalie said, they got a point. We went for a couple of rounds of this, and I was beating his ass at it, even though that's irrelevant. I don't remember what round we were on, but we did our 3, 2, 1 countdown. My brother, the goalkeeper, said left. I, the shooter, said center. The voice from outside the porch window said left. Me and my brother froze. We had the shade down, but my mom had left the porch light on, so that was the only light illuminating our room. The dim porch light coming in from the borders of the shade. At the time, in my house was my mother on the opposite side of the house, my sister the room over, my dad in the basement, and me and my brother shitting our pants practically. We waited for what seemed like an hour, but was probably only 30 to 45 seconds, and we heard a giggle and a playful knock at the window. "Let's go another round, come on boys," the voice said in a cheerful, playful tone. Honestly, I want to say it was a scary voice and sounded menacing, but it didn't. It sounded like a woman not too old, but not young, and it was just normal, like a normal sounding voice. Nothing off about it besides where it was coming from and the time it came. Me and my brother were seriously freaked out, and I was about to break down because of how close I was to this woman. The thought that all I had to do was lift the shade and I'd be face to face with this person scared the shit out of me and made me go as still and stiff as if I had just looked into Medusa's eyes. After a while of me and my brother not responding, my brother started, slowly moving from his bed to the door as to not make any noise. As my brother was tiptoeing to the door, the sound of nails being ran down a window started. It was very slow from top to bottom. At that point, my brother made it to the door. He looked back at me and brought his finger to his lip, gesturing me to keep quiet. Once the nails stopped running down my window, I heard her light footsteps make their way off my porch and disappear. I laid there for an eternity, not moving until my brother returned, and I saw my mom move hastily by my door, making her way to front door. The porch light flipped off, and I was left in darkness, with my brother waiting in the doorway for my mom's return. I heard my mom call my dad up the stairs and his groggy, annoyed footsteps coming upstairs. They talked, then came in me and my brother's room, and we relayed what happened. Apparently my mom caught sight the lady turning out of our driveway on foot behind some tall bushes. Thank God we had a long driveway, otherwise my mom probably would have thought we were crazy. Considering no harm was done besides leaving me terrified of my window, my parents didn't call the police. They just thought it was really weird and stayed up the rest of the night to make sure she didn't return. I'm 17 now, my brother is in college, so I have the room to myself. My bed still touches the window because I'm too lazy to move the rest of the furniture in my room so I can move my bed. The shade to that window has not been opened since that incident and probably never will be.